She hit record and dialed 9 a.m. because a 68-year-old man was fishing at dawn. "You're going to jail!" she screamed at her phone, broadcasting to thousands. "Here's what happens when petty tyrants get drunk on power. They never see their downfall coming." That old bamboo rod was about to destroy her $2 million empire. The lake she claimed to control, she had no idea who owned it. And that police chief, she demanded, "Let's just say that call backfired spectacularly. Drop a comment where you're watching." Because what happened next will change how you see every neighborhood bully with a clipboard. My name is Walter Thompson, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd seen it all during my 30 years working for the Department of Defense. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened that morning at Silver Lake. I'd only moved to Willowbrook Estates 3 days earlier, still surrounded by cardboard boxes in my kitchen, still adjusting to life without Margaret. She'd passed 5 years ago, but every morning I still reached for her photo in my wallet, remembering her words. "When we retire, I want us to live by a lake where you can fish every sunrise and I can watch the ducks with our grandchildren." So here I was, making good on a promise to a woman who could no longer see me keep it. That morning I woke at 5:30, the same time I'd woken for 3 decades in the service. Old habits die hard, especially ones that saved your life in Belgrade, Mogadishu, and a dozen other places I still can't talk about. I made my coffee in the half-unpacked kitchen, black with no sugar, just like Margaret used to tease me about. "You drink coffee like you're still planning an extraction," she'd say. Looking out the window, I saw Silver Lake reflecting the dawn like a mirror, not a ripple disturbing its surface. The sight pulled at something deep in my chest. A mixture of grief and peace that only widows and widowers understand. I decided right then to go fishing, grabbing the bamboo rod my grandfather had left me, the only family heirloom that survived our countless military moves. The morning air felt like silk against my skin as I walked across the dew-covered grass. Birds were just beginning their morning symphony, and the scent of jasmine flowers drifted from someone's garden. I found a spot on the bank where a small wooden bench sat, probably placed there by some other soul seeking solitude. Setting down my tackle box, I prepared my line with the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be and no one waiting for him. The first cast sent ripples across the perfect mirror of the lake, and I settled in, feeling more at peace than I had in years. For 30 minutes, it was just me, the water, and Margaret's memory. At 6:15, that peace shattered like a dropped wine glass. The sharp click, click, click of high heels on pavement cut through the morning silence like a chainsaw through butter. I turned to see a woman in a full business suit. At 6 in the morning, no less, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the early hour. She held her phone up high, and I could see the recording light was on. "Good morning, HOA family," she announced to her screen. "I'm here at Silver Lake, and I've just caught someone in the act of violating our community standards. This elderly man is stealing from our ecosystem." My trained eye caught details civilians would miss. The slight tremor in her hand, the way she kept glancing around for witnesses, the practiced way she held the phone. This wasn't her first confrontation. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the intrusion, using the same tone that once talked down a bomber in Cairo. She marched closer, her heels sinking slightly into the grass with each step. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, moving her phone to capture both of us in the frame. "Fishing," I replied simply. "And you are?" Her face flushed red beneath her heavy makeup. "I'm Barbara Mitchell, president of the Willowbrook Estates, Homeowners Association, and you, sir, are trespassing on HOA property." I couldn't help but notice how she emphasized her title, how her chest puffed out with self-importance. In my experience, people who need to announce their power rarely deserve it. Barbara's voice rose an octave, playing to her online audience. "Did you read the HOA bylaws? All 147 pages. Fishing is strictly prohibited in Silver Lake. This is ecological vandalism." Just then, as if the universe wanted to make a point, I felt a tug on my line. I calmly began reeling in what felt like a decent-sized bass, all while Barbara shrieked into her phone, "He's stealing from our ecosystem. This is a crime. I'm calling 911 right now." Her viewers must have been having a field day, because I could see comments flooding her screen faster than she could read them. My peripheral vision, honed by years of threat assessment, caught movement in windows. Neighbors watching the show. I lifted the 2 lb bass from the water, admired it for a moment, then gently removed the hook and released it back into the lake. "Catch and release, Miss Mitchell. The fish is fine." But Barbara was already dialing, her voice reaching hysteria, levels that would have triggered security protocols at any embassy. Police. Yes, this is Barbara Mitchell, HOA president at Willowbrook Estates. "I have a trespasser here who's illegally harvesting fish from our lake. He's threatening me with an fishing rod. Please send someone immediately." I shook my head and began packing up my gear, moving with the deliberate calm that had served me well in much more dangerous situations than this. Something felt off, though. My instincts, the ones that kept me alive through 3 decades of international incidents, were screaming that this was bigger than just a HOA dispute. A sound of sirens reached us within 3 minutes, which seemed excessive for a fishing complaint. Barbara pined for her camera, adjusting her hair and checking her lipstick. "Justice is about to be served, everyone. Keep watching. You're about to see what happens to rule breakers in my community." The police cruiser pulled up to the lake access road, and I heard the engine shut off. The door opened, and boots hit the pavement. Barbara practically vibrated with anticipation. "Officer, this man right here, he's been—" The words died in her throat as the officer came into view. My heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from recognition. I knew that walk, that bearing, even before I saw the face. "Dad." Christopher's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "What are you doing here?" My son stepped into full view, his chief of police uniform crisp in the morning light, his expression a mixture of surprise, concern, and something else. Was it pride? Barbara's phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering on. The pavement, but still recording. The live stream was capturing every second of her shock. Her mouth opened and closed like the bass I just released. No sound coming out. In the windows, I saw neighbors stepping outside, drawn by the drama. This was about to get very interesting, and my old instincts told me Barbara Mitchell had just made a tactical error of epic proportions. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 seconds. Christopher walked toward me, Deputy Ramirez trailing behind him with an expression that suggested he was trying very hard not to laugh. Barbara finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. This is your father." Christopher embraced me briefly, professional despite the circumstances. "Dad, why didn't you tell me you'd already moved in? I could have helped with the boxes." I shrugged, feeling oddly guilty. "You've been busy, son. I figured I'd call you this weekend, have you over for dinner once I found the pots and pans." The truth was more complicated. We'd barely spoken since Margaret's funeral, both of us drowning in grief in our own ways. Barbara scrambled to regain control of the situation, snatching up her phone from the ground. The screen was cracked, but still recording. Chief Thompson, regardless of your relationship, this man was fishing illegally on HOA property. I demand you enforce the law. Christopher turned to her with a professionally neutral expression I'd seen him perfect over the years. Miss Mitchell, can you show me the specific bylaw that prohibits fishing and the documentation proving the HOA owns this lake? Barbara's face went through several shades of red. Of course I can. It's in the office. I'll email it to you, but everyone knows the HOA manages all common areas. She was lying. In 30 years of reading people, I'd learned the tells. And Barbara Mitchell was showing all of them. That's when Robert Bradley decided to make his entrance, walking his golden retriever along the path. At 70, Robert moved with the confidence of a man who'd spent 40 years as a real estate attorney and knew exactly how the world worked. Morning, Walter. Glad to see you're settling in. Christopher, good to see you, son. How's the family? He paused, taking in the scene with obvious amusement. Barbara causing trouble again. Barbara whirled on him. This doesn't concern you, Robert. But Robert just smiled, the kind of smile that made opposing lawyers nervous in courtrooms. I recognized a fellow strategist when I saw one, actually. Barbara, it does concern me. You see, I've lived here for 15 years, and I've always wondered about the ownership status of Silver Lake. Funny thing about property law, it requires actual documentation, not just assumptions. He turned to me with that same knowing smile. Walter, has anyone explained the history of this lake to you? I shook my head, genuinely curious now. Robert's smile widened. Silver Lake has been privately owned since 1987. It's never been HOA property. Barbara sputtered like a broken engine. That's ridiculous. I have documents. My instincts sharpened. She was too defensive, too quick to claim proof she couldn't produce. Forged documents don't count, Barbara, Robert said mildly. I did some research a few years back when you tried to ban my grandchildren from feeding the ducks. The lake is owned by a company called Evergreen Holdings. He paused for dramatic effect, clearly enjoying himself. And the CEO of Evergreen Holdings was Margaret Thompson. I felt the blood drain from my face. Margaret, my wife. The tackle box slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. Robert nodded sympathetically. She bought the land 30 years ago when this was all undeveloped. Smart woman, your Margaret. She developed the residential areas but kept the lake as private property. When she passed, ownership would have transferred to you, though I'm guessing the lawyers haven't completed the paperwork yet. Barbara's phone was shaking in her hand. Whether from rage or fear, I couldn't tell. This is impossible. I've managed this community for 15 years. I have records, meeting minutes, budget allocations. She spun toward Christopher, desperation creeping into her voice. This is a conspiracy. They're trying to undermine my authority. Christopher remained calm, though I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. Mr. Mitchell, I think we need to review all the HOA's legal documents. Can you provide them? Barbara backed away slowly. I'll need time to gather everything. It's extensive. Very extensive. Translation. She needed time to forge better documents. Deputy Ramirez, who had been quietly checking his tablet, looked up with interest. Chief, Miss Mitchell has called 911 47 times this year, 17 for suspicious walking, 12 for aggressive gardening, and 18 for potential fishing activities. Christopher's expression hardened slightly. Miss Mitchell, you do understand that misuse of emergency services is a federal crime. And Barbara's bravado crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. I was protecting the community. That's my job. But something in her eyes had changed. The predator had realized she might be prey. That's when Dorothy Williams emerged from her house next door. At 78, Dorothy moved slowly but deliberately, carrying a small box that she clutched like a life preserver. Barbara, I've held my tongue for 3 years, but enough is enough. Barbara's face went white. "Dorothy, you don't understand." But Dorothy cut her off with a raised hand. "I understand perfectly. We were roommates in college, Barbara, best friends for 20 years. I've watched you transform from a sweet, caring person into this." She held up a USB drive. 3 years of evidence, Barbara. Every email, every falsified receipt, every diverted payment. I kept hoping you'd come to your senses, but after what you did to the Johnsons last month, I can't stay silent anymore. Barbara made a grab for the USB drive, but Dorothy pulled it back. The Johnsons lost their home because of your illegal fees, Barbara. They're living with their daughter now, 75 years old, and homeless because you wanted a new Mercedes. The gathering crowd, because of course a crowd had gathered, began murmuring angrily. Christopher stepped forward. "Miss Williams, I'll need to see that evidence." Dorothy nodded and handed him the drive. "There's more, Christopher. Barbara Mitchell isn't even her real name. She has a daughter, Jennifer, who tried to contact her last month. Barbara blocked her calls. What kind of mother does that?" The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Barbara's face contorted with rage and fear. "You swore you'd never tell." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "That was before you became a monster, Catherine. Or should I say, Catherine Walsh from Michigan." "Barbara?" Catherine stumbled backward, her heel catching on the grass. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know who's behind me." "The developers, the city council. They'll destroy all of you." She ran toward her car, yanking off her heels to move faster. "This isn't over, Walter Thompson. You just declared war on forces you can't imagine." But as she reached her car, she turned, back with a manic grin. "You think you've won? Check your precious lake tomorrow morning. See what happens when you cross me." She held up her phone, showing a message she just sent. "Lake maintenance scheduled for dawn. Hope you enjoy what's left of Margaret's dream." Christopher was already on his radio, but Barbara peeled out, leaving skid marks on the pristine HOA-maintained street. I felt a chill run down my spine. In my experience, cornered people did desperate things, and Barbara Mitchell had just shown she was capable of anything. That afternoon, I sat in Robert's living room, surrounded by decades of property records and legal documents. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but neither of us noticed. Robert spread out a surveyor's map from 1987, his finger tracing the property lines. "Your Margaret was brilliant, Walter. She bought this land when it was considered worthless swamp." "Land! Everyone thought she was crazy, but she saw the potential. Look here." He pointed to the lake. "She specifically excluded Silver Lake from the residential development, filed it under Evergreen Holdings to keep it protected." I stared at the familiar signature on the documents, Margaret's distinctive handwriting making my chest tight with grief and pride. She'd always been the planner, the one who thought 3 moves ahead while I was still assessing the current situation. "But how did I not know about this?" I asked, feeling foolish. Robert sighed. "The lawyer handling her estate, Jim Morrison, no relation to you, had a heart attack 6 months after Margaret passed. His office was a mess and a lot of documents got misplaced. I suspect it wasn't entirely accidental. Someone wanted to keep you in the dark about your ownership." He pulled out another folder. "I've been doing some digging since this morning. Barbara has been collecting lake maintenance fees from every household for 15 years. $50 per month per household. 400 households, that's $20,000 monthly for maintaining a lake she doesn't own." My tactical mind immediately saw the pattern. This wasn't just theft, it was a long-term operation. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 3 o'clock, and by 2:45, the community center was packed beyond capacity. I could hear the angry voices from the parking lot. As Christopher and I arrived, "Let him through," someone shouted as we approached the door. "That's the man Barbara tried to arrest." The crowd parted, and I found myself facing 200 angry, confused neighbors. Barbara stood on the stage with a laptop and projector, her Powers suit replaced with something even more severe, her face set in horrid lines. Behind her stood a man I didn't recognize, expensive suit, cold eyes. "Developer," my instincts screamed. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Barbara began, her voice amplified by speakers that squealed with feedback. "We face a crisis in our community this morning." This man, she clicked a button, and my face appeared on the screen. Captured from multiple angles during our morning encounter, violated 7 HOA bylaws in 15 minutes. He trespassed on HOA property, engaged in illegal harvesting of protected wildlife, threatened me with a weapon, and conspired with local officials to undermine the authority of your duly elite board. The crowd murmured, some nodding along, others looking skeptical. The man in the expensive suit whispered something in Barbara's ear, and her smile grew sharper. Law 3.2.1, Barbara continued, clicking through slides that looked like they'd been hastily assembled. No aquatic disturbance before 8 a.m. Bylaw 7.9.4, no wooden implements within 50 ft of HOA property. Bylaw 12.1.7, no sitting on common area grass without written permission. Someone in the back laughed. "Are you serious? We need permission to sit on grass." Barbara's face flushed. "These rules exist to maintain order, to protect property values. Would you rather live in chaos?" The expensive suitman stepped forward. "Perhaps I should introduce myself. Brandon Hayes, Sunset Holdings. We have plans to improve this community, but they require cooperation." I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room turn to me. My old training kicked in. Assess, analyze, act. May I speak? Barbara gripped the microphone. "You have no standing here. You're not a member in good standing." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folder Robert had given me. "Actually, Miss Mitchell, I'd like to discuss my standing, specifically my standing as the legal owner of Silver Lake." The room erupted. Barbara's voice screeched through the speakers. "Security! Remove this man!" But the 2 elderly volunteer security guards just shrugged. They lived here too and had their own grievances. With Barbara, I made my way to the front, Christopher and Robert flanking me. 30 years ago, my wife Margaret bought the land that became Willowbrook Estates. She developed the homes you all live in, but she kept Silver Lake as private property. She wanted to preserve it for future generations. I opened the folder and held up the original deed. This is the legal documentation notarized and filed with the county. Silver Lake has never belonged to the HOA, which means every lake. Maintenance fee you've paid for 15 years has been collected under false pretenses. Hey, stepped closer to Barbara, his expression darkening. This wasn't part of their plan. The crowd's murmur turned into a roar. "Where's our money?" someone shouted. "I've paid." "Thousands," another voice added. "My mother went without medication to pay those fees." An elderly man cried out. Barbara was backing toward the exit, but Hayes grabbed her arm. "Fix this," he hissed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "These documents are fake, photoshopped. I'll have my lawyers." But Dorothy was already at the laptop, having somehow accessed Barbara's presentation. "Speaking of lawyers, Barbara, let's look at some real documents." The screen changed to show bank statements. $2.3 million. That's how much has been diverted from HOA accounts in the past 10 years. Dorothy clicked through transaction after transaction. 50,000 at Nordstrom, 30,000 at Tiffany, 100,000 in Las Vegas, all paid with the HOA corporate card all justified as community improvement expenses. She looked directly at Barbara. "Remember when you told me those shopping trips were for networking with other HOA leaders? I kept all the receipts you asked me to destroy." The crowd was on its feet now, pressing forward. Someone was crying. An elderly woman. "You said if I didn't pay the special assessment, you'd put a lien on my house. I borrowed for my grandchildren's college funds." Christopher stepped forward, his police chief authority cutting through the chaos. "Everyone, please remain calm. We're investigating." His phone rang and his face went pale as he listened. He looked at Barbara. "Ms. Mitchell, or should I say, Miss Walsh, you're wanted in Michigan for embezzling $500,000 from a veterans charity." The room went dead silent. Even Hayes stepped back from Barbara, recognizing a sinking ship. Barbara laughed high and unhinged. "So what? I made this place perfect. Before me, you were nothing, just a bunch of people living in chaos. I gave you order, I gave you standards." She grabbed the microphone from its stand. "You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I took your money. Yes, I have partners, developers, who are going to make billions from this land. And yes, my name is Catherine Walsh, and I'm proud of everything I've done. You sheep needed someone like me to lead you." The crowd surged forward, but Christopher and his deputies held them back. "Catherine Walsh, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent." But Barbara wasn't done. She pulled out her phone with one hand while the other was being cuffed. "Dead man, switch!" she screamed, showing a timer on her screen, counting down from 60. I had a feeling this day might come. There are devices under the lake dam. You've got 58 seconds before Silver Lake becomes Silver Mud Pit. 57.56, the crowd panicked. People rushing for exits. Christopher grabbed for the phone, but Barbara threw it into the crowd. 50 seconds. Better run, but I wasn't running. Something felt wrong. The timer was a simple app, not connected to anything. "She's bluffing," I said calmly. "Check her phone history. It's just a countdown timer app." The timer hit 0. Nothing happened. Barbara's face crumpled. "It was supposed to work," Hayes promised. But Hayes was already gone, slipped out during the chaos. FBI agents flooded the room. "Catherine Walsh, we're taking you into federal custody." As they led her away, she screamed, "You'll pay for this! Walter, I'll poison your precious lake. I'll destroy everything Margaret loved." The next morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. Racing to my window, I saw 5 dump trucks at the lake's edge and Barbara somehow out on bail standing. With a megaphone, "Emergency lake maintenance. Toxic algae outbreak requires immediate intervention." Workers were already pouring something into the water, and within minutes I could see the change. The crystal-clear lake turned a sickly green, and the smell of chemicals filled the air. I ran outside, my heart breaking, as dead fish began floating to the surface, their white bellies reflecting the morning sun like accusing eyes. This was chemical warfare, and I'd seen its effects before in places where Geneva Convention didn't apply. "Stop!" I shouted, but Barbara just laughed into her megaphone. "This is perfectly legal. I have permits." She waved a piece of paper that looked like it had been printed 5 minutes ago. "Environmental remediation is a priority for the HOA." But as I got closer, I could see what they were really dumping. Industrial waste, the kind that kills everything it touches. My hands clenched around my grandfather's fishing rod, which I'd grabbed without thinking. Veins stood out on my arms as I fought the urge to strike back physically. "Margaret's Lake," I whispered, watching her lifetime die in front of me. For the first time in decades, I wanted to hurt someone. Within minutes, news vans arrived. Someone, probably one of the neighbors, had called them. I found myself in front of cameras, my old media training kicking in as I explained what was happening while Barbara screamed in the background about her rights and authority. The environmental inspector arrived within 30 minutes, took one look at the water, and immediately ordered all work to stop. "This is environmental terrorism," he announced, testing the water with specialized equipment. "The chemicals in this water are industrial-grade toxins. This is a federal crime." Barbara's smug expression faltered. "But I have permits." The inspector looked at her paperwork and shook his head. "Ma'am, these are obviously forged. No agency would approve dumping these chemicals anywhere, let alone in a protected wetland." That's when Barbara completely lost control. She grabbed a microphone from a news crew and screamed, "Walter Thompson destroyed everything. 15 years I've worked to build an empire here. This was supposed to be mine. The developers promised me $10 million. She picked up a rock and hurled it at me. My reflexes, dulled by age but sharpened by decades of dodging worse things than rocks, weren't quite fast enough. The rock caught me on the forehead and blood immediately began running down my face. The cameras caught everything as I stumbled backward, Christopher catching me before I fell. Through the blood, I saw Barbara's expression, pure, vindictive satisfaction. "Barbara Mitchell, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon and environmental terrorism," Christopher announced as deputies cuffed her. She laughed maniacally. "Worth it. Do you hear me? It was worth it to see him bleed." As paramedics cleaned my wound, a man in an expensive suit approached. Brandon Hayes, the developer Robert had warned me about, stood with 2 bodyguards like something out of a bad movie. "Mr. Thompson, unfortunate about your accident. Perhaps you should consider selling the lake to someone who can properly manage it. Accidents happen to stubborn old men, especially ones who don't know when to quit." My assessment was immediate. Narcissist, probably sociopathic, definitely dangerous. Christopher stepped forward. "Mr. Hayes, that sounded like a threat." Hayes smiled coldly, just observing the reality of Florida real estate chief. "Your father seems prone to accidents. First rocks. Who knows what might be next? Maybe he'll slip and fall. Maybe his house will have an electrical problem. These old places, you never know." I met his eyes steadily in B-grade 1991. "I faced down worse than you. They had guns and government backing." "You have what?" "Money and threats." His smile faltered slightly. He hadn't expected pushback. That night, I activated every security measure I'd learned in 30 years of government work. Motion sensors, cameras, panic buttons. My house became a fortress, but I also set traps, psychological ones. When the 3 masked men arrived at midnight with gas cans, they found signs. "Smile. You're on FBI camera. This house protected by Smith & Wesson. Survivors will be prosecuted. Survivors will be prosecuted again." They hesitated, confused. That's when the sprinklers activated. Not water, but bright blue dye. The kind banks use in money bags, impossible to wash off for days. From my safe room, I watched them panic on camera and made a single call. "Strike team is go," I said into my phone, using protocols from another life. Within minutes, FBI SWAT surrounded them. The blue-eyed intruders surrendered immediately, looking like rejected Smurfs. One broke down, crying. "Hayes paid us 50 grand, said, 'Burn the old man out or break his legs. There's a list, 12 houses to hit tonight.'" The domino effect was immediate. Within hours, raids happened across the state. Hayes was dragged from his mansion, screaming about his connections. "Do you know who I am? I own judges, I own cops. I own the agent arresting him." Finished the sentence. "Nothing. You own nothing now." The FBI raids made national news. I sat in the hospital being treated for stress-induced chest pains. Not a heart attack, thank God. While watching the coverage, Major corruption ring busted in Florida. HOA scandal scrolled across the screen as footage showed agents leading away person after person in handcuffs. Christopher sat beside my bed, still in uniform after a sleepless night coordinating with federal agents. "Dad, you need to rest. Doctor's orders." But I couldn't rest. Not while Margaret's lake lay poisoned, and the woman responsible still breathed free air. Even if that air was in a jail cell, my tactical mind was already planning 3 moves ahead. $2.3 million from our HOA alone, Christopher read from his tablet. Multiply that by 5 HOAs, add in the kickbacks from rigged construction contracts, and we're looking at $50 million over 10 years. Hayes's phone had everything. Texts arranging bribes, payments to city officials, even plans to force out elderly residents through illegal foreclosures. He showed me a text exchange. "Look at this one from Barbara. The old veteran moved in. He owns the lake. Need him gone."
"ASAP," Hayes replied. "Use the usual methods. If that fails, we have other options." My chest tightened again, but not from any heart condition. This was pure rage, the kind I'd learned to channel into action decades ago. The community response
was overwhelming. Within 6 hours of the news breaking, a fundraising page for lake cleanup hit $500,000. Environmental groups volunteered equipment and expertise. Hundreds of volunteers showed up with boats and nets, ready to help however they could. Save Silver Lake became a rallying cry across social media as people shared the story of corruption and environmental destruction. Margaret Thompson Foundation was established that same day, dedicated to protecting Florida's waterways from similar attacks. Even in death, Margaret was still protecting what she loved. Barbara's lawyer quit publicly, holding a press conference.
"On the courthouse steps, my client is undefendable," he announced. "She threatened judges, jury members, even me. I've practiced law for 30 years, and I've never encountered someone so completely without remorse."
The public defender assigned to replace him looked about 12 years old and terrified. Barbara's assets were frozen by federal order, leaving her unable to hire the high-powered defense team she'd bragged about. The woman who'd lived in luxury on stolen money now had to rely on an overworked public defender, fresh from law school. There was poetry in that. The kind of justice that didn't require a courtroom. 3 days later, I checked myself out of the hospital against medical advice. "I'm going to that trial," I told Christopher when he tried to stop me. "Dad, you need rest." The doctor said I cut him off with a look that had once stopped diplomatic incidents in their tracks. "Son, your mother spent 30 years building dreams around that lake. Barbara tried to destroy it out of spite. Some fights you can't walk away from, no matter what the doctors say. This is for Margaret, for our community, for everyone that woman hurt. I will look her in the eyes when justice comes." He knew better than to argue when I used that tone. The evidence against Barbara was mountainous. 10,000 documents had been seized from her home and office. 50 hours of secret recordings Dorothy had made over 3 years painted a picture of a woman consumed by greed and power. In one recording, Barbara's voice was clear. "These idiots pay their fees like clockwork. Sheep following a shepherd who's leading them to slaughter. Every special assessment, every fine, every late fee, it all goes to making me rich. They deserve to be fleeced for being so stupid." Another recording had her laughing about an elderly couple she'd forced from their home. They cried when they left. 60 years in that house, and I took it for a $300 unpaid fine. Even the FBI agents looked disgusted. The environmental damage to Silver Lake was severe, but not irreversible. Marine biologists worked around the clock introducing beneficial bacteria and filtering systems. The dead fish were removed and catalogued, over 3,000 in total, including several endangered species. Each dead fish became another charge against Barbara. Environmental terrorism carried a 25-year sentence alone, and she'd killed protected species. Add in the assault, fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft, and Barbara was looking at potentially 200 years in prison. No amount of good behavior would see her free again. But the investigation revealed something even darker. Barbara and Hayes
hadn't just stolen money. They'd destroyed lives. The Johnsons, the elderly couple Dorothy had mentioned, had both died within 6 months of losing their home. Stress-induced heart attacks. The medical examiner said 3 other elderly residents
had died shortly after being forced from their homes. While not legally murder, the moral weight of those deaths hung over the case. Barbara had killed through greed, as surely as if she'd used a weapon. In my world, we'd called people like her soft killers. Those who destroyed lives without pulling triggers. Christopher held a press conference on the courthouse steps, looking every inch the leader his mother had always known he'd become. "Corruption ends today in Willowbrook," he announced to the gathered crowd. "My father stood up to organized crime and survived. He's not a victim. He's a hero, and we will protect our citizens from anyone who tries to exploit them." The crowd erupted.
In applause, someone started chanting justice for Walter, and soon hundreds of voices joined in. It was overwhelming and humbling. I just wanted to fish in peace, and somehow I'd become the face of a movement against HOA corruption. Margaret would
have found that hilarious. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity on the morning of Barbara's trial. 500 people crammed into a space meant for 200, with fire marshals nervously checking exits. National media outlets circled the building like vultures, sensing the story that would captivate America. I sat in my wheelchair, a concession to my doctor,
and Christopher wearing my best suit, the one I'd worn to Margaret's funeral.
It seemed fitting somehow. Barbara appeared in her orange jumpsuit, shackled at ankles and wrists, her perfectly styled hair now showing grey roots, her face bare of the heavy makeup she'd hidden behind, but her eyes still blazed with unrepentant hatred. When she saw me, she mouthed, "You're dead." Judge Patricia Henderson, who'd been friends with Margaret years ago, had refused to recuse herself. "I knew Margaret Thompson," she'd said, "but I also know the law. The defendant will receive a fair trial, though based on these charges, I'm not sure any amount of fairness will help her." She looked at the 47-page indictment with visible disgust. "In 30 years on the bench, I've never seen charges quite like these. Environmental terrorism, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, racketeering. Miss Walsh, how do you plead?" My tactical assessment of the judge, tough but fair, the kind Margaret would have liked. Barbara stood up, chains rattling. "Not guilty. This is persecution. I'm being railroaded by a conspiracy." The judge sighed. "Ma'am, do you have representation?" The young public defender started to stand, but Barbara waved him off. "I'll defend myself. I know the law better than any of these fools." The prosecutor actually smiled at that. The judge leaned forward. "M. Walsh, defending yourself in a case of this magnitude is extremely inadvisable. You're facing potential life imprisonment." And Barbara laughed. "I ran a HOA for 15 years. I know all about rules and regulations." Someone in the gallery muttered, "That's not the same thing." And nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Even I had to suppress a smile. The prosecution's case was devastating. 147 slides of evidence, each more damning than the last. Videos of Barbara poisoning the lake played on the courtroom screens, the dead fish floating like accusations. Bank records showed systematic theft going back a decade. The prosecutor, a veteran who'd taken down mob bosses, seemed almost bored by how easy it was. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant hasn't just stolen money, she's destroyed lives, poisoned the environment, and shown absolutely no remorse. She is quite simply a danger to society who must be removed from it. He showed a photo of the lake before and after. The gasps from the jury said everything. Dorothy took the stand, clutching a handkerchief. "Barbara and I were best friends for 20 years, she began, her voice shaking. I watched her change from a caring person into a monster, consumed by greed and power. She played a recording from their Christmas party 3 years ago. Barbara's voice filled the courtroom. These idiots paid for my Bentley, my yacht, my condo in Aspen, every fake fine, every made-up fee straight into my accounts. Democracy. I am the law here. They're sheep, and I'm the wolf. It's nature, baby." The jury looked horrified. One woman was crying. This wasn't just crime, it was cruelty elevated to an art form. When my turn came to testify, Christopher wheeled me to the witness stand. I spoke calmly despite the bandage still on my forehead. I just wanted to fish where my wife had dreamed of spending our retirement. Ms. Walsh turned paradise into hell for hundreds of families. But this isn't about revenge. It's about justice for every senior citizen on a fixed income. She robbed every family she destroyed, every dream she crushed for profit. Barbara couldn't contain herself. "You stole my—"
"Lake!" she screamed.
I looked at her calmly, using the same voice that had once diffused a hostage situation. "It was never yours, Ms. Walsh. It belonged to my wife, and she wanted it preserved for everyone to enjoy." Barbara stood up, rattling her chains. "I hate
"You, I hate your dead wife. I hate this whole place." She tried to lunge at me, but was restrained by baifs. The jury watched in shocked silence.
That's when Jennifer Mitchell walked into the courtroom. Barbara froze mid-scream. "Jennifer," she whispered. Her daughter, whom she hadn't seen in 15 years, walked to the witness stand. "Hello, Mother. Or should I say, Catherine, I've come to testify for the prosec." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear Barbara's labored breathing. This was the kind of drama that made careers for court reporters. Jennifer's testimony was devastating. "She chose power over her own children," Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. "She kicked me out at 16 for questioning her methods, said I was weak like my father. I've watched from afar as she hurt hundreds of people. She's not sick. She's not misunderstood. She's evil, pure, and simple. The mother I once knew died long ago. What's left is just a monster wearing her fate." Barbara shrieked like a wounded animal. "Traitor! I gave you life. You owe me everything." The judge had to call a recess to restore order. In my experience, when family turned against you in court, the verdict was already decided. Barbara's defense consisted of showing photos of manicured lawns and clean streets while ranting about her vision.
"I created paradise," she shrieked. "These ungrateful people lived in beauty because of me. Every rule, every fine, it was all for their benefit. They should be thanking me. They should be building statues to me." She turned to the jury with wild eyes. "Don't you see? I'm a visionary. I took chaos and created order. I am a god." The jury for woman actually laughed out loud, then covered her mouth in embarrassment.
The judge didn't even bother to admonish her. When defendants compared themselves to deities, insanity defenses usually followed. But Barbara was too narcissistic for that escape route. A jury deliberated for exactly 37 minutes. When they returned, the 4 women stood with confidence. On all 137 counts, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly. "I will have order." She turned to Barbara, who had gone pale beneath her grey roots. "Catherine Walsh, You are hereby sentenced to $35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will pay $5 million in restitution to your victims, and you are permanently banned from serving on any homeowners association in the United States of America. It was the HOA ban that seemed to break Barbara completely. Barbara's final meltdown was spectacular. "I'll kill you all," she screamed, lunging toward me. "Especially you, Walter, and your dead wife. I'll dig her up." And the Biffs tackled her before she could finish the threat. As they dragged her out, she continued screaming obscenities and threats that would add years to her sentence. "My lake, my kingdom, you stole my life." The last thing we heard before the door closed was her promising revenge from beyond the grave. The courtroom slowly emptied, people hugging and crying with relief. I stood from my wheelchair. I'd been feeling better but kept using it for the sympathy factor, and Christopher hugged me.
"It's over, Dad." I looked toward the window where I could see the direction of Silver Lake. "No, son. Now the healing begins. We have a lake to restore and a community to rebuild, but I kept one detail to myself. Barbara's threats didn't worry
Me. I'd face down worse than her. What worried me was who might be waiting to take her place. 6 months later, Silver Lake sparkled in the morning sun, clearer than it had been in years. The environmental cleanup had been successful beyond our wildest hopes. Fish populations were recovering, birds had returned to nest in the surrounding trees, and the water was so clean you could see the bottom even in the deepest parts. I sat on the same bench where this all began, my fishing rod in hand, surrounded by the 75 members of our Sunrise Fishing Club. Dorothy sat next to me with her own rod, having discovered a love for fishing in her late 70s. "Who knew it could be so peaceful?" she said, watching her bobber drift on the gentle current. I smiled, thinking of how Margaret would have loved this scene. Neighbors becoming friends, sharing simple pleasures. The Willowbrook Estates HOA had been dissolved by unanimous vote. In its place, we'd established a democratic community board where every voice mattered and every decision required transparency. Robert Bradley served as our volunteer legal advisor, making sure we never again fell into the trap of concentrated power. The monthly potlucks by the lake had become legendary, with neighbors actually talking to each other instead of reporting each other for violations. It turned out that without Barbara's reign of terror, people actually liked their neighbors. Who would have thought that fear wasn't necessary for a functioning community? The Margaret Thompson Memorial Park had its grand opening on a perfect Florida morning. I donated $1 million, money I'd never known we had, until the lawyers sorted through Margaret's brilliant investments to create something lasting. 1,000 jasmine trees, Margaret's favorite, filled the air with perfume. The monument at the center bore a simple inscription where love conquers tyranny and nature heals all wounds. Christopher gave a speech about his mother that left not a single dry eye in the crowd of 1,000 who'd come to celebrate. He spoke of her vision, her kindness, and her belief that communities thrived on trust, not control. Barbara, meanwhile, served her time in federal prison, assigned to janitorial duty in a cosmic joke of karma. Her cellmate was Maria Rodriguez, a woman Barbara had evicted 5 years ago over a $20 late fee. "Remember me?" Maria had said on Barbara's first night. "You took my house. Now I get to watch you clean toilets for the next 35 years. Barbara had tried to establish a cell block HOA in her first week, attempting to create rules about shower times and meal lines. The other inmates had laughed her out of the common room. She ate alone, cleaned alone, and existed alone, finally. Experiencing the isolation she'd inflicted on others, there was justice in that loneliness. One morning, Jennifer Mitchell approached me at the lake. Mr. Thompson, I wanted to thank you for standing up to my mother and to apologize for all the pain she caused. She looked so much like Barbara, but with kind eyes instead of calculating.
Ones. You're not responsible for her choices, I told her gently. But you can choose differently.
I offered her my spare fishing rod. Have you ever been fishing? She shook her head, tears already forming. She said fishing was for lazy people who didn't value productivity. I spent the next hour teaching her the basics, how to bait a hook, how to cast, how to wait patiently for life to come to you instead of always trying to control it. But like teaching someone how to breathe again. When Jennifer caught her first fish, a small bass no bigger than her hand, she broke down completely.
I've never felt this peaceful, she sobbed. Is this what normal families do, just sit together and enjoy nature? I helped her release the fish back into the water, watching it swim away healthy and free. This is what healing looks like. I said,
Your mother never learned that controlling everything means enjoying nothing. Don't make her mistake. Jennifer became a regular at our fishing club, slowly learning to relax, to laugh, to be part of a community instead of ruling over it. The sins of the mother didn't have to become the destiny of the daughter. The transformation of Willowbrook became a case study for other communities trapped under tyrannical HOAs. Property values increased by 40% once people realized they could actually enjoy their homes without fear of arbitrary fines. Crime dropped to near zero. It turned out that neighbors who talk to each other also look out for each other. We hosted seminars on democratic governance, teaching other communities how to avoid the trap of concentrated power. The Willowbrook miracle, they called it in the media. Though it wasn't really a miracle, it was just what happened when good people stood up to evil and said enough. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most revolutionary. The wider corruption network fell like dominoes across multiple states. 27 people were eventually convicted with sentences totaling over 300 years. $200 million in assets were recovered and distributed to victims across 5 states. Brandon Hayes got 20 years and sang like a canary, exposing corruption that reached all the way to state government. The Florida HOA Reform Act, informally known as Frank's Law, passed the state Senate 79-21, making it a crime to use HOA positions for personal gain and requiring complete transparency in all HOA financial dealings. Margaret would have been proud to see her lake spark such widespread change. Barbara watched it all from prison, growing grayer and angrier with each passing day. She wrote appeals that were denied, filed lawsuits that were dismissed, and slowly realized that her kingdom was gone forever. The woman who'd once worn designer suits now wore faded prison grey. The woman who'd eaten at 5-star restaurants now subsisted on cafeteria food. The woman who'd ruled through fear now lived in fear, knowing that every inmate knew her story and despised her for it. It was poetic justice of the highest order. I received letters from other inmates describing how she still tried to control things. The TV remote, the lunch line, even the library books. Old habits died hard, even behind bars. On the 1-year anniversary of our first confrontation, the community gathered at Silver Lake for a celebration. 500 people came to fish, picnic, and remember how far we'd come. I stood to speak, looking out at faces that had gone from suspicious strangers to genuine friends. A year ago, I just wanted to fish in peace. What I found instead was a community held hostage by greed and corruption. But we learned something important. Evil thrives when good people do nothing. Margaret always believed that kindness could change the world. She was right. But sometimes kindness needs to be backed up with courage. Sometimes protecting paradise means fighting those who would destroy it. I raised my fishing rod in a toast to Margaret Thompson, who preserved this lake for all of us, to Dorothy Williams, who found the courage to speak truth to power, to everyone who stood up and said no more, and yes, even to Barbara Mitchell, who taught us the importance of vigilance
against tyranny.
May we never forget these lessons. As the sun set over Silver Lake, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson, 500 voices joined in celebration. Children fed ducks where Barbara had once banned them. Elderly couples walked hand in hand where she'd once required permits. Teenagers fished where she'd called it illegal. This was what victory looked like. Not just the absence of tyranny, but the presence of joy. And somewhere, in a federal prison, a grey-hailed woman sat alone, finally understanding that power taken by force was no power at all. The lake she'd tried to destroy would outlive her by centuries. A testament to the truth that love always conquers hate in the end.